In the vastness of the Arizona desert, where stars seemed close enough to touch, a lonely cowboy made a choice that would change everything. When a strange, wounded creature appeared at his doorstep one cold night, he didn't reach for his rifle, he reached for food. That single act of kindness sparked something extraordinary. What he didn't know was that his compassion would summon an army from the stars, and his quiet ranch would become the stage for humanity's most unexpected alliance. Jack Morrison had spent 43 years learning the language of solitude. His ranch sat 20 miles from the nearest town, a weathered collection of wooden structures surrounded by endless sage and red rock formations that glowed like embers at sunset. The cattle knew his voice, the horses trusted his touch, and the silence had become his closest companion. After his wife Sarah passed 5 years ago, Jack found comfort in the predictable rhythms of ranch life, mending fences at dawn, checking water troughs at midday, and sitting on his porch at night, watching constellations wheel overhead. On that particular October evening, the air carried an unusual chill. Jack had just finished his supper of beans and cornbread when he heard a sound that didn't belong, a wet, rasping noise coming from near the barn. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the darkness, his boots crunching on gravel. What he found defied everything he thought he knew about the world. The creature was roughly the size of a large dog, but that's where any earthly comparison ended. Its skin shimmered with an iridescent quality, shifting between deep purples and silvery blues in the flashlight's beam. It had 4 limbs, but they bent at angles that seemed anatomically impossible. Its head was oval-shaped with large, dark eyes that reflected Jack's light like pools of oil. The creature was injured. A deep gash across its side oozed a luminescent fluid that looked more like liquid mercury than blood. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. His rational mind screamed at him to run, to call someone, to do anything except stand there staring. But there was something in those eyes, something that transcended the alien appearance. Pain, fear, the universal language of suffering that Jack had seen countless times in wounded animals. The creature made a soft, whistling sound, and its body trembled. "Easy now," Jack heard himself saying, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "Easy?" He slowly backed toward the house, keeping his eyes on the creature. In his kitchen, he grabbed what remained of his supper, some leftover roast beef from the previous night, and a bowl of water. His hands shook as he carried them back outside. The creature hadn't moved, though its breathing seemed more labored. Jack set the food and water a few feet away and stepped back. The creature's eyes followed his movements. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with obvious effort, it dragged itself forward. Its method of locomotion was disturbing and fascinating, those impossible limbs moving in a rhythm that hurt. Jack's eyes to follow. When it reached the food, it made a scanning gesture with what might have been its head, then began to consume the offerings. Jack watched in amazement as the creature ate. The beef disappeared in ways he couldn't quite process. There was no visible mouth in the traditional sense, yet the food was somehow absorbed. The water followed, and Jack could swear he saw the creature's shimmering skin brighten slightly, as if the sustenance was reviving it. He spent the next hour slowly moving closer, eventually sitting on the ground about 10 feet away. The creature finished eating and turned those profound eyes toward him again. Then it did something that made Jack's breath catch it, raise one of its limbs in what could only be described as a gesture of thanks. The movement was deliberate, unmistakable in its intent. "You're welcome," Jack whispered. As the night deepened, Jack brought blankets and made a sheltered space in the barn. The creature followed him, moving with less difficulty now. Jack set up an old camping lantern for light and positioned himself in a corner where he could keep watch. He knew he should be terrified, knew this situation was beyond anything his simple ranch life had prepared him for, but something felt right about it. In the lantern's glow, watching this being from another world rest in his barn, Jack felt less alone than he had in 5 years. The creature's breathing eventually steadied into what seemed like sleep. Jack dozed off intermittently, jerking awake at every sound. Toward dawn, he woke to find the creature watching him. In the early light filtering through the barn's gaps, he could see its wound had partially closed, the shimmering edges knitting together in a way that was beautiful and strange. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jack had no idea that his act of kindness had been observed by others, that somewhere in the darkness above Earth's atmosphere, a decision was being made that would change his life forever. Jack spent the morning of that next day in a state of surreal numbness, going through the motions of ranch work while his mind reeled. The creature, he started thinking of it as Scout for lack of any better name, remained in the barn, seemingly content to rest and recover. Jack brought more food, eggs, bread, some vegetables from his garden. Scout consumed everything with that same mysterious process, and each time, Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sense of connection that transcended species. Around mid-morning, Scout attempted something new. It made a series of sounds, whistles, clicks, and tones that seemed almost musical. Jack listened intently, wondering if it was trying to communicate. Then Scout moved toward the barn wall and, using one of its limbs, began to draw in the dust that had accumulated there. Jack leaned closer, his heart racing. The drawing was crude, but unmistakable, a circle with smaller circles around it, connected by lines. A solar system. Scout pointed to one of the outer circles, then to itself. Then it drew a simple stick figure, pointed to Jack. Communication. The creature was trying to tell him where it came from. "You're far from home," Jack said softly. Scout continued drawing, creating images that told a story. A vessel, clearly a spacecraft. Something that looked like an explosion or malfunction. The craft falling. Scout surviving but injured. The simple images conveyed a narrative of disaster and survival that Jack understood on an emotional level. But then Scout drew something that made Jack's blood run cold. It sketched multiple figures like itself, then surrounded them with aggressive angular shapes that seemed to represent danger or enemies. Scout tapped this drawing urgently, its body language conveying distress. Whatever Scout was running from, it had followed them to Earth. The afternoon sun was high when Jack heard the sound. It started as a low hum that he felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He ran outside, Scout following with surprising agility. What Jack saw would be burned into his memory forever. The sky was filled with lights. Not random lights, but a formation of craft descending in a perfect pattern, like a choreographed dance of impossible technology. They were beautiful, sleek vessels that seemed to shift and shimmer like Scout's skin, each one about the size of a school bus. Jack counted them as they landed in the wide open space beyond his ranch house. 50, 75, 100, more still coming. His legs felt like water. This was it, the moment every science fiction story had prepared him for, and simultaneously left him completely unprepared to face. First contact, except it wasn't first anymore. He'd already made contact with Scout. These were Scout's people, and they were coming. The vessel settled on the desert floor with barely a sound. For a long moment, nothing moved. Jack stood frozen, Scout beside him, both watching the ships. Then, in unison, openings appeared in the sides of each vessel, and figures began to emerge. They looked like Scout, but with variations, different sizes, slightly different colorations, some with additional limbs or sensory organs. They moved forward as one, stopping about 100 yards from where Jack stood. He couldn't count them all, but there had to be at least 150 beings from another world, standing in the Arizona desert, watching him. Scout made a long, melodious call that carried across the distance. The gathered aliens responded with similar calls, creating a symphony of otherworldly voices that made Jack's skin prickle. Scout moved forward, and Jack found himself following, his feet moving on their own accord. The central figure among the aliens was larger than the others, with skin that shimmered in deep gold and copper tones. It approached slowly, deliberately, until it stood directly before Jack. He could see his reflection in its eyes, a weathered cowboy in worn jeans and a work shirt, completely out of his depth but standing his ground. The large alien reached out with one limb, and Jack instinctively understood what was expected. He extended his hand. When they touched, Jack felt a jolt, not painful, but intense. Images flooded his mind. Scout's desperate escape from a dying ship. The pain and fear of being alone on a hostile world. Jack's kindness shining like a beacon in the darkness. And something else, gratitude profound and overwhelming, from not just this alien, but from all of them. The golden alien released Jack's hand and turned to Scout. They touched in the same way, and Jack watched Scout's colors brighten, its body straightening with renewed vigor. Then the golden alien turned back to Jack and did something extraordinary. It placed its limb over its chest area in what could only be a salute or sign of respect. And behind it, all 150 aliens did the same. The next hours passed in a blur of impossible wonders. The aliens Jack learned to think of them as the Luminari, a name that came to him during one of those strange touching communications, set up what could only be described as a camp around his ranch. Their technology operated on principles that made Jack's head spin. Structures appeared from devices no larger than his fist, expanding into shelters that seemed to be made of solid light. Energy sources hummed with quiet efficiency, powering equipment that served purposes Jack couldn't begin to guess. But what struck him most was their behavior toward him. Every Luminari he encountered offered that same gesture of respectful to chest, a bow of acknowledgement. They brought him gifts, a device that, when he touched it, filled his mind with their language. Strange foods from their world that tasted like nothing Earth had ever produced. And most precious of all, their trust. Through the communication device, Jack learned their story. The Luminari were explorers, scientists, and philosophers from a world orbiting a star they called Kellert H, roughly 40 light-years from Earth. They had been studying this region of space when they encountered another species, the Dracoth, aggressive and territorial beings who saw the Luminari as threats. A battle had ensued, and Scout's vessel had been damaged, forcing an emergency landing on the nearest habitable world. The Luminari had tracked Scout's distress signal, but had hesitated to reveal themselves to humanity. They'd been observing Earth for weeks, studying, trying to determine if contact would be safe. Then they'd witnessed what Jack had done, a simple act of feeding a stranger, of showing compassion to something unknown and frightening. That changed everything. The golden alien, whose name translated roughly to Keeper of Light or just Keeper, communicated to Jack. In all our observations, we'd seen humanity's capacity for fear, for violence, for tribalism. But in your action, we saw something else. We saw the potential for unity beyond species, for kindness that transcends the familiar. You showed us what humanity could be. Jack felt heat rising to his face. I just fed a hungry critter. Nothing special about that. Everything is special about that, Keeper responded. You could have killed Scout. You could have captured Scout and turned Scout over to your authorities. Instead, you offered sustenance and shelter. That is not nothing, but the story wasn't complete. That evening, as the desert cooled and stars emerged, Keeper shared the darker truth. The Dracoth had followed them. Not the entire war fleet, but a scouting party of 3 vessels. They would arrive within days, seeking to finish what they'd started. The Luminari were scientists and explorers, not warriors. They had defensive capabilities, but were vastly outnumbered by their pursuers. We will leave, Keeper said, the communication carrying a weight of sadness. We will not bring war to your world. You have shown us kindness, and we will repay it by taking our conflict away from your home." Jack sat on his porch, surrounded by aliens from another star, and thought about what Keeper had said. He thought about Sarah, about the kindness she'd shown him every day of their marriage. He thought about the code of the Old West, about standing with your friends when trouble came calling. He thought about the decision that would brand him as either a hero or a traitor to his own species. "No," Jack said finally. "You're not leaving." Keeper's colors shifted in what Jack had learned indicated confusion or concern. "You do not understand the danger, Jack Morrison. The Dracoth are." "Don't matter what they are," Jack interrupted. "You're here now. You're on my land, under my protection. Way I was raised, you don't abandon friends when they need help. And you don't run from bullies. We are not your responsibility." "Maybe not," Jack agreed. "But you're my friends now. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to figure out how to defend this place, together. And if those Dracoth things want to cause trouble, they'll find out what it means to mess with someone under a cowboy's protection." The silence that followed was profound. Then, one by one, every luminary within earshot began to pulse with bright, joyous colors. Keeper stepped forward and placed both limbs on Jack's shoulders, the gesture conveying emotion too deep for words. In that moment, standing under alien stars with impossible friends, Jack Morrison understood that his lonely life had just become something extraordinary. The transformation of Jack's ranch into a defensive position happened with startling speed. The luminary's technology, combined with Jack's practical knowledge of the terrain, created something unprecedented. They dug into the rocky hills surrounding the ranch, establishing observation posts equipped with sensors that could detect incoming threats from orbit. Energy barriers, invisible walls of force that the luminary could activate instantly, were positioned at strategic points. Jack contributed what he could, his knowledge of sightlines, defensive positions, and the value of high ground. But the real preparation was happening on a different level entirely. Keeper explained that they needed to contact human authorities to warn them about what was coming. The presence of the luminary couldn't remain secret much longer, and the arrival of hostile aliens would be catastrophic if humanity was caught completely unprepared. The question was how to make contact without triggering a panic or military response that could endanger everyone. Jack made the call. He contacted his nephew, David, who worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. The conversation was perhaps the strangest in telephone history. "Dave, it's Uncle Jack. Don't hang up. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen to every word and believe me. I have aliens on my ranch, friendly ones, and hostile ones are coming. We need help." The silence on the other end lasted so long Jack thought the call had dropped. Then, "Uncle Jack, have you been drinking?" "Stone cold sober, and I wish I was crazy, but I'm not. Get whoever you need on this line, military. Government, scientists, I don't care, but do it fast. We have maybe 3 days before all hell breaks loose. It took 18 hours, but they came. Not with tanks and soldiers, though those were positioned miles away as backup. Instead, a delegation arrived. Scientists, linguists, a general, a senator, and various officials whose exact roles Jack never quite understood. They came in helicopters that landed in his front pasture, and they stepped out to find a cowboy standing alongside beings from another world. The initial contact went better than Jack had feared. The luminary's gift for communication, combined with their obvious intelligence and peaceful demeanor, quickly overcame the initial shock. Keeper shared star maps, technological data, and most importantly, detailed information about the Dracoth threat. The scans their ships had conducted showed 3 Dracoth vessels in a degraded orbit around the moon, damaged but operational, preparing for descent. General Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed woman with silver-streaked hair, studied the data with growing concern. "You're telling me that in approximately 60 hours, 3 warships from a hostile alien species are going to attack this location. Yes, Keeper confirmed. They pursue us with singular focus. They will not negotiate. They will attempt to destroy us, and, if necessary, will destroy anything that stands between them and their goal. And your scientists? Not soldiers? We are explorers and scholars. We have defensive capabilities, but limited offensive weapons. We are not equipped for sustained combat. The senator, a heavy-set man named Thompson, looked pale. We need to evacuate the area. Get everyone out before. No, Jack interrupted. You evacuate, and those Dracoth will just chase the Luminari wherever they go. Maybe to a city next time. Maybe to somewhere with thousands of people instead of just one stubborn cowboy. We make our stand here, in the middle of nowhere, with time to prepare. He's right, General Chun said, her tactical mind already working through scenarios. If we're going to face this threat, better here in the desert than overpopulated areas. But we need to bring in everything we have. Air support, ground forces, missile batteries. Will that be enough? Thompson asked. Chun looked at Keeper, then at Jack, then back to the senator. I don't know, but it's what we have. And apparently we have 57 hours to figure out how to make it work. Those 57 hours became a crucible of impossible cooperation. Military forces arrived under cover of darkness, mobile missile launchers, anti-aircraft batteries, armored vehicles. The official story was a large-scale training exercise. Scientists set up equipment to study the Luminari technology, sharing information both ways. The Luminari offered what defensive innovations they could. Energy shield emitters that could be combined with human military hardware, sensor integration that would give early warning of the Dracoth arrival, and training in the physics of space combat. Jack found himself at the center of it all, not because he had authority or expertise, but because both sides trusted him. He was the bridge between worlds, the cowboy who'd fed a hungry alien and started a chain reaction that might save both species. He moved between command tents and alien vessels, carrying messages, soothing tensions, and occasionally reminding everyone what they were fighting for. On the final night before the Dracoth were expected to arrive, Jack stood on his porch with Keeper. The ranch was surrounded by the largest military presence the area had ever seen, combined with technology from the stars. It should have felt safe. Instead, Jack felt the weight of impending violence, of lives hanging in the balance. Are we ready? He asked. Keeper's colors dimmed, a sign of uncertainty. I do not know, Jack Morrison. The Dracoth are experienced warriors. We are not. Your people are brave, that they have never faced weapons like these. Tomorrow, we will learn if kindness and courage can stand against hatred and violence. They can, Jack said, with more confidence than he felt. They have to. They came with the dawn, 3 dark shapes descending through the atmosphere like falling stars of malevolence. The Dracoth vessels were nothing like the graceful Luminari ships. These were brutal, angular constructions that looked designed for one purpose: destruction. Alarms screamed across the defensive perimeter. Soldiers rushed to positions. Luminari activated their shields. And Jack Morrison, standing in the command center that had been erected near his house, felt his heart hammering as humanity faced its first interstellar war. All units weapons free on my command. General Chun's voice crackled across the radio. Target the lead vessel. Fire! The desert erupted. Missiles streaked upward, leaving contrails of smoke against the pale morning sky. Anti-aircraft guns roared. The Luminaries' energy weapons added streams of brilliant light to the chaos. For a moment, Jack dared to hope it would be enough. The combined assault was devastating to witness. But the Dracoth shields flared, absorbing the impacts. Explosions bloomed against invisible barriers as the hostile ships continued their descent. They returned fire, and Jack understood why the Luminari had been so concerned. The Dracoth weapons were terrifying beams of energy that carved through rock and metal, turning defensive positions into slag and fire. One military vehicle simply ceased to exist, vaporized by a direct hit. Shields up. Keeper commanded, and the luminary energy barriers activated around the ranch center. The shimmering walls of force caught the next Dracoth attack, but Jack could see them flickering under the assault. They wouldn't hold forever. The battle evolved into chaos. Human forces adapted quickly, using mobility and terrain to their advantage, drawing fire and then retreating behind cover. The Luminari coordinated their shields, creating overlapping fields of protection. Keeper had shared tactical information that proved invaluable. The Dracoth shields were powerful, but had weak points, vulnerable spots at the intersection of their field projectors. There, a young Air Force captain named Rodriguez pointed at her screen. The undersides of their hulls, the shields are weaker there. All air units, target the ventral surfaces. Chun commanded. Ground forces, keep them distracted. F-16 screamed overhead, missiles locking onto the newly identified weak points. 2 hit home, and one of the Dracoth ships shuddered, losing altitude rapidly. It crashed into the desert, a mile away with an impact that shook the ground. But the remaining 2 vessels intensified their attack, focusing their fire on the ranch center where the command structure and the majority of the Luminari were located. The shields were failing. Jack could see it in the way they flickered and dimmed with each hit. Keeper's colors had gone dark with stress, directing Luminari forces in a desperate defense. A missile battery took a direct hit, killing 3 soldiers instantly. Another strike collapsed part of the defensive perimeter. The Dracoth were winning through sheer firepower. Then Scout did something extraordinary. The small alien, the one Jack had fed that first night, moved to a Luminari device Jack hadn't seen before, a crystalline structure pulsing with internal light. Scout began manipulating it, and the communications device in Jack's ear suddenly filled with a transmission aimed at the Dracoth vessels. It wasn't a message of surrender or plea for mercy. It was a story. Scout broadcast everything that had happened, the crash landing, the fear and injury, Jack's compassion, the gathering of the Luminari fleet. But more than that, Scout transmitted emotion, the raw feeling of experiencing kindness from a species that had every reason to be afraid. Scout showed the Dracoth what had been built here over the past days. Cooperation between species, trust built between beings who had every reason to fight. For a moment, the Dracoth attacks ceased. Their vessels hung in the air, and Jack imagined the warriors inside processing what they'd received. Then one ship resumed firing, but the other hesitated. Keeper seized the opportunity, opening a direct communication channel. "We are not your enemies," Keeper broadcast. "We are explorers, as you once were. We remember your history, Dracoth. We remember when your people reached for the stars in wonder, not conquest. Is this what you have become? Destroyers of those who would learn? Enemies of compassion?" The hesitating Dracoth vessel's weapons powered down. Then, impossibly, it turned its guns on its companion ship. The 2 Dracoth vessels engaged each other in a fierce exchange while human and Luminari forces watched in stunned silence. Within minutes, both ships were severely damaged, limping away from the battlefield and beginning an emergency ascent to orbit. The desert fell silent, except for the crackle of fires and the groans of damaged equipment. It took several moments for Jack to process what had happened. They'd won, not through superior firepower, but through the power of an idea, the simple notion that different species could choose cooperation over conflict. Medics rushed to treat the wounded. Soldiers emerged from cover, stunned to be alive. The Luminari began helping with rescue efforts, their technology proving invaluable in locating survivors and stabilizing the injured. And in the center of it all, Jack found Scout, the small alien who turned the tide of battle not with weapons, with truth. He knelt beside Scout, who was clearly exhausted from the effort of broadcasting so powerfully. "You did it," Jack said softly. "You crazy little thing. You actually did it." Scout's colors pulsed weakly but warmly, and for the second time, the alien raised a limb in that gesture of thanks. Jack laughed, feeling tears streak through the dust on his face, and rested his hand gently on Scout's shimmering form. 3 months later, Jack Morrison's ranch had become the most famous piece of land on Earth. What the media had dubbed the Arizona Stand was now the site of the first permanent embassy between humanity and the Luminari. The old barn where Jack had first sheltered Scout had been preserved as a historical monument, and construction was underway on a facility that would house diplomats, scientists, and visitors from both species. Jack himself had become an unlikely celebrity, though he handled it with characteristic reluctance. He gave interviews when pressed, always deflecting praise and emphasizing the courage of the soldiers who'd fought, the wisdom of the Luminari, and the importance of what had been learned that day. But mostly, he tried to maintain his normal life, checking on cattle, mending fences, sitting on his porch at sunset. Except now, he usually had company. Scout had remained at the ranch, choosing to stay with the human who'd first shown kindness rather than return to the Luminari home world. Through the translation technology, Scout had explained the choice simply, "This is where I learned that family is not defined by species. This is home." Keeper and several other Luminari had also established permanent residence at the embassy site. Relations between the Luminari and humanity had blossomed into a partnership that promised to revolutionize both civilizations. Technology exchange programs were teaching humans about faster-than-light travel, while Luminari scientists marveled at human art, music, and literature. Schools were teaching Luminari language and culture. The United Nations had established a new council specifically for interspecies relations. But perhaps the most significant development had come from an unexpected source. The Dracoth vessel that had turned against its companion and helped end the battle had returned to the moon, where its crew had requested asylum. The captain, a being who called himself Corax, had communicated a message that Keeper shared with Jack one evening as they watched the stars. "He says that witnessing what happened here changed him," Keeper explained. "The Dracoth have been trapped in cycles of conquest and war for generations. But what you did, what Scout broadcast, showed them there was another way. Corax wants to bring that message back to his people. He believes others will listen." "You think they will?" Jack asked. "I hope so. Your species has a saying, 'Hope springs eternal.' I have learned the wisdom of that phrase." Jack nodded, thinking about everything that had changed. The world was fundamentally different now. Humanity knew it wasn't alone, knew that the universe was full of diverse intelligences, some friendly and some hostile, but all capable of change. The isolationist voices that had initially called for Earth to close itself off to alien contact had been largely drowned out by those who saw the opportunities for growth, learning, and mutual prosperity. General Chun, who'd been appointed as the military liaison to the Luminari embassy, stopped by the ranch regularly. She and Jack had formed an unlikely friendship, the career military officer and the cowboy philosopher, united by having lived through something extraordinary. "You know what the president asked me yesterday?" she said during one visit, accepting a glass of iced tea on Jack's porch. "She asked if I thought you'd consider being the ambassador to the Luminari. Official diplomatic posting." Jack nearly choked on his own drink. "Me? I'm a rancher, not a diplomat. You're the only human in history who started an interstellar alliance by feeding a hungry visitor. I'd say you're uniquely qualified," Chun smiled. "But I told her you'd say no. You're needed here, doing exactly what you're doing, showing that ordinary acts of decency are the foundation of extraordinary things." As summer turned to fall, the ranch found its new rhythm. Scientists and diplomats came and went. Luminari and human children played together at the embassy school. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchange programs flourished. And through it all, Jack Morrison maintained his simple routine, a constant reminder that the greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts. One evening, as the sun painted the desert in gold and purple, Jack sat on his porch with Scout beside him and Keeper hovering nearby. A group of young Luminari were playing some kind of game with human children in the field, their laughter sounding different but equally joyful. A reporter had asked Jack earlier that day if he understood the significance of what he'd started, if he grasped how much the world had changed. He thought about it now, watching the sunset. He thought about Sarah and how she'd always said that kindness was never wasted. He thought about the moment he decided to feed a frightened, wounded creature instead of fearing it. He thought about the choice between isolation and connection, between fear and compassion. "Do you understand?" Keeper asked, apparently reading something in Jack's demeanor. "Do you see what you began?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I fed somebody who was hungry. Everything else, that was just folks choosing to be decent to each other. Choosing to see past the differences to what's the same. We all get hungry. We all get scared. We all want to be safe and cared for. Species doesn't change that." "Profound wisdom from a simple rancher," Keeper said, colors warm with affection and a bit of teasing. "Not wisdom," Jack corrected, "just common sense. Sarah used to say that the world would be a whole lot better if folks remembered that we all just trying to get by. Guess that applies whether you're from Arizona or 40 light years away." As the stars emerged, the same stars that had shone on that first night when a lonely cowboy had made a simple choice, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's passing, a sense of purpose, of belonging to something larger than himself. He'd been prepared to live out his days in quiet solitude, a man forgotten by the changing world. Instead, he'd become a bridge between civilizations, proof that the greatest strength wasn't found in weapons or walls, but in the courage to extend a hand to a stranger. The universe, it turned out, was full of strangers who could become friends if someone was brave enough to take the first step. Scout leaned against Jack's leg, warm and solid despite the otherworldly shimmer. In the distance, the lights of the embassy glowed like a beacon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new visitors, new opportunities for the alliance that had been born in this unlikely place. But tonight, Jack Morrison was simply a rancher sitting on his porch, watching the stars, grateful for the hunger that had brought a stranger to his door and the compassion that had changed everything. The future was unwritten, full of infinite possibilities. And it had all started with a simple meal shared under alien stars.